Yo, what's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Coffee Pod. My name is Shisha Zed.
Drink the coffee, it'll make you feel better.
In this video, I'm going to be reacting to some expert attorneys who are warning men to avoid some of the biggest mistakes that men make when it comes to marriage. Without any further delay.
No fault divorce. In the old days, you used to have to say bad behavior, adultery, abandonment, mental and physical cruelty. Now, all you have to do is say irreconcilable differences, that nothing can put your marriage back together again, and you get a divorce. The most important thing to protect yourself financially is having a lawyer in your state, an experienced family lawyer, to help you through the process. Women feel that they're entitled to alimony and men feel that they're not. In the last 40 years, I have had 4 cases that I remember of men getting alimony that I had to twist their arms and beat them up in order to get alimony.
Now that's nuts.
Should men seek alimony? More of them should.
Local divorce attorney says men should avoid teachers, nurses, and stay-at-home moms as a potential spouse.
I debated posting this because I know how bad it's going to be when people get this answer from me.
Keep it real.
But there were so many people that asked that I decided, after a lot of thought and consideration, that I will go ahead and respond to the most asked question from my last video, which is, what professions in women should men avoid? And a lot of you thought that those same professions for men that I told you to avoid would translate to women, and they really don't. I don't think that there's enough data out there for me to comment on that. But I've had one military female client who was pretty difficult, but other than that, I've not seen any correlation in those same professions. But I went through my case list, and if you have a problem with me giving an introduction to this, then just scroll along, because I'm about to hurt a lot of people, so I'm going to explain.
They're not going to like this coffee.
And you're going to have to listen to it if you want the answer.
Keep it real.
I went through my case list, and there's about 60 cases on my case list. And there are some common professions that I see in women. The most common one that I see is teacher. The second most common is nurse. But those cases are not cases where the female is really difficult or litigious or anything like that. They're just kind of run-of-the-mill cases. The most common profession that I see in the female parties in my divorces, and this is over 13 years of cases. Oh my God, I'm so nervous.
Say it.
Is stay-at-home mom. Hate me. I know y'all are gonna hate me, but let me explain why. Number one, when you're divorcing a stay-at-home mom, they are paralyzed with fear, and rightfully so, because their whole life is going to change. They are going to have to go back to the workforce. They're going to have to possibly move. Their finances are about to be very different. There's lots of things that they don't know financially about what's going on. And so they tend to stick their head in the sand and stall. And so the cases become very contested and very expensive. The second reason that I see that stay-at-home moms end up being the most common profession in a divorce is that I think there's a tendency, and this is completely my opinion, just based on my observations, they tend to focus so much on the children, and the husband focuses so much on career that first of all, they don't feel appreciated by one another. But the husband starts feeling like an ATM, and the wife becomes completely focused on the children. And
Sounds
they
about
tend
right.
to grow apart. So I think that's why it's the most common. That's not hate, just an observation. It's probably my last TikTok. So see ya.
That's because they're going to cancel it for telling the truth.
My last videos have sparked some interesting discussion about different types of marriage dynamics and what works and what doesn't. And so one of the more common ones that was asked about was a situation where a woman earns more money than the man and what that situation looks like. So I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why I think that marriages where women earn more than men or where men don't work. Number 1 is, as I mentioned in my last video, men need to feel valued. And I think that when women earn more than men, it has a tendency to emasculate men. I think that they are ingrained within the society to think I have to earn, I have to provide, right? Men are hunters and gatherers and they're supposed to provide. And I think that it kind of upsets the natural balance for the woman to be carrying that weight, because sorry to say this, but a lot of women who work also carry a lot of weight in the home. So I think that adds to it. So even regardless of whether or not you have kids, I think a woman carrying more of the financial weight not only tends to emasculate the man, but also can cause more resentment to build in a woman that would build in a man in the reverse situation, where the man is the higher income earner. So that's number one. Number two is that the men in these situations that are married to high-powered women, a lot of times, and the ones that I've seen fail, the men tend to be very, for lack of a better word, not motivated. They tend to be, they might be educated, but they don't tend to work very hard. They don't really seem to have a passion for anything. They tend to be lazy, and they tend to kind of rely on the woman to run the household. I mean, she does the bills, she does the finances, she takes care of the kids if there are any.
More proof that women
kind of
don't
is the
respect
CEO of the household.
men
They just
who they
don't seem to
out-earn.
really contribute much. It's the opposite of a traditional stay-at-home mom dynamic, where the mom is running the household and the husband is working every day and paying for the expenses. The woman in that situation tends to do it all. And so I just think that over time it just weighs on her, and she's just like, I'm out of here. Or the man will cheat, as in my last video. And then finally, what's really interesting about these divorces is they tend to be the cheapest. Women who are the breadwinners, they're protecting their money. I mean, men do too, but not like the women do. And they tend to really push their husbands behind the scenes to settle. They tend to have to pay the entire bill, and they don't want to pay that bill. So they keep the process really streamlined and quiet. So
you guys heard it for yourself. Surprising, right? The nurses one, not really, but the stay-at-home mom was a little bit surprising. Let's get into this comments, man. Let's see what people have to say, because people were mad and they were triggered. This commenter says, how about avoiding listening to people who tell you who to date? Oh, she dodged that accountability like the Matrix, man. This next commenter says, we already know how nurses move, flight attendants too. Shit. He's keeping it real right there. I can attest to that. That's facts. This next commenter says, not avoid us nurses. Yeah. You're on the list, lady. Next commenter. So women are off limits, but men aren't? Sheesh. Somebody else says, BS. Laugh out loud. Divorce happens because they deemed it so. If the wife makes more, she's career focused. The man is going to cheat regardless. Ugh. Guys, I just made a video about this. Somehow women have managed to make this whole topic about cheating. I'm not even going to read the rest of that, man. I love how everyone was all for the last video on what men not to date, but now everyone's mad in these comments. I'm dead. People are seeing how women avoid accountability like the plague, man. They'll avoid that shit. They'll do everything to make sure they don't have to drink that coffee. This commenter says, so legally all stay-at-home moms stack up that rainy day fund. But that's the wrong way of thinking, right? She tried to explain why the divorces happen, and women are going to see this and think to themselves, okay, so I need to stack up for my divorce. Instead of thinking, hey, why don't I try to avoid leaving? Because again, we all know that 70% of divorces are initiated by women, right? Another nurse says, I rebuke this video, signed by a nurse. Yeah, they don't really like what's going on here. Here we have a woman who's a professional who says, as a licensed professional counselor of over 10 years, I approve and support this message. Fellas, listen up. Take notes. Do your own research, but you know what I mean. I wouldn't take it completely for face value, but I think it's valuable enough that you got to look into this stuff.
I represented a husband. He worked since he's 16 years old, saving money. And he bought a house prior to getting married. He bought it the week prior to getting married. Within 3 years, that house that he had put his entire life savings into was jointly titled. He was
man.
so upset that he lost half of that house, half of his life savings. You need to seek out a real estate lawyer. You have to remember that when you put the other spouse's name on the title, it gives them ownership, and they own half of the house and half of the equity. If you own a house and you're getting married, listen to this, because it could save you a fortune. Do not put your spouse's name on the title. Even if you're getting a mortgage and the mortgage company seems to tell you that you have to put your wife on the title, you don't. Do not put your wife on the title, even if she has to sign the mortgage. If
She's giving you that free
put your spouse's
game.
name on it, your spouse is going to own half the house. If you inherit money during your marriage, it is your own separate account. Make sure that any savings account, checking account, brokerage account is only in your name. Do not add your spouse's name to the title, ever. By putting your marital assets, your marital income into your inheritance, you're going to lose half of your inheritance. If I'm talking to you and you're getting married, you need to make sure that your old bank account that had $50,000 in it stays with the $50,000, and that when you get married, you open up a new account, a new bank account, a new savings account, a new checking account. You need to separate the money that you earn during the marriage from the money you had prior to the marriage. And do not put any monies that you are earning during the marriage into your prior premarital accounts. That money that you are putting in there loses its separate identity. Now it's marital, and your spouse is entitled to half of it. Your inheritance should be kept in a separate account. Do not add any marital earnings during the marriage to that account. You can invest it, you can do whatever you want with it, but do not add it to a joint account. Do not put anybody else's name on it. Make sure you keep it in your own account, and then it will stay your separate property.
Free game. Free game. Let's get it. Let's go. Let's get it.
I am astounded that Bill Gates did not get a prenup. He did not get a prenup. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the money he had then and the money they have now? And he never got a prenup. If Bill and Melinda Gates hadn't settled and they went to court, the stock market could have been affected. Many, 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 many companies could have failed. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people could be jobless.
That's crazy.
It would have affected an enormous financial community.
All over a marriage.
Especially if they thought that a judge was going to be deciding everything, and a judge wasn't going to be weighing how to make sure that all of the companies that they are promoting, all of the foundations and all of their good works that they are doing don't go under. I had a client who came to me after he had already settled his divorce. He gave his wife the retirement. He gave his wife the house. He gave his wife more of the brokerage accounts.
Damn.
And what happened? He never got back financially on his feet. So
Sheesh.
he ended up at the end of his life not being able to afford to live himself, and his wife was in a wonderful financial position. You do not want to
Sorry.
do that. Base it on now and make sure that you don't give away the pots.
She hit a
What's
lick.
his and what's hers in marriage? If you bought a car prior to the marriage and you paid it off, that stays your separate property. When you buy a car during the marriage, you are buying it with marital income, and therefore it is marital. Everything that is purchased during the marriage with marital income is marital and gets divided in half. Why don't men get alimony? Because it's my personal belief that the laws are neutral. They're gender neutral, but men do not get treated fairly when it comes to alimony in the court system.
Shout
Judges
out.
are biased against them.
Shout out to
They are,
Denise for
and
keeping it
I'm sorry
real.
to say it, but that's the truth. In the last 40 years, I have had 4 cases that I remember of men getting alimony that I had to twist their arms in order to get alimony.
40
If
years.
you're a parent and thinking about moving out of the house, you need to hear this. If you are going to be leaving the marital house when you have children, that you do not leave until you have a time-sharing schedule in place so that you'll be able to see the children 50% of the time. That is very important before you leave. Let's talk about who pays child support. The person earning more money pays child support. There are 2 things that go into child support. One is how much you're earning, who's earning more, and the second one is how many nights, how many overnights the children spend with each parent. Put those together, there's a formula, and then that is how child support is calculated.
Did you know that when you get married, everybody has a prenup? Yep, the prenup is the state law that you live in. Every state has rights and obligations associated with marriage. So if you get married without drawing up your own terms and conditions,
Listen
you are
up,
by
man.
default submitting to your state's prenup. Okay, so the #1 cause of divorces, movies like this. I love this movie. I also love Ryan Gosling. But stuff like this sets unrealistic expectations of marriage, and when the honeymoon phase is over, they end up in my office. We call movies like this inventory stalkers for divorce attorneys.
And who falls for those movies? Women.
If you want to know why men don't want to get married a second time after divorce, it's because they lose in divorce. A lot of men lose their children altogether when they are fit fathers, or they end up with 30% custody while the woman gets 70, and they also end up paying a huge amount of money in child support. Add to that, because the woman won the children, she's also getting a large percentage of their assets, much more than a 50-50 share, where she's getting to walk away with the family house, all the furniture, everything inside. And after he pays that child support every month, he's strapped with alimony for the next 5 years. And he looks at his life moving forward and is struggling to pay rent and to buy a new house and to be able to have a nice place for his kids. Why would he take that risk again?
In this video, I'm going to be reacting to some of the most horrific divorce stories I have heard, and they'll be shared by expert divorce attorney Lindley Richter. Grab your coffee. You're going to need it. Let's get it.
Dad was paying child support of about $750 a month for 2 children based on his income of $50,000 a year. Well, about 2 years into his child support obligation, he ended up inheriting a large sum of money, about $1 million, when his grandparents passed away. Mom got wind of that and hired a lawyer and took Dad back to court and asked for an increase in child support, claiming that that inheritance that he received should be included in income to increase Dad's income, thereby increasing his child support obligation. Well, the court agreed, and what the court did is
Of course.
the amount of money that he inherited, divided that by the number of years that the children would be minors and he would have a child support obligation, and then increased Dad's income by that amount. Dad ended up having to pay child support now based on $150,000 a year of income when you included that inheritance in there. What do you think about that? Do you think that's fair? About a year ago, I had a case where a father of a child that had been born out of wedlock was ordered to pay child support, about $500 a month. And he had paid that child support for about 4 months until the parties got married. In other words, he married the mother of the child. And at that point, he stopped paying child support. Well, move forward 10 years and they're getting divorced. And guess what?
Surprise.
The child support office now comes after him for all of those arrears, over $50,000 worth of back payments, even though he was married to the mother during all of that time.
What?
Well, that case went to court, and guess what? The judge ruled that he, in fact, owed that money.
Oh my
Well,
God.
move forward a year. I have another case, very similar to that case, where the father was ordered to pay child support, paid it for a little while, then the parties got married, then they got divorced, and the child support office came after him for that entire arrearage. But in this case, we had a different judge, and this judge decided the case on principles of equity and fairness instead of strictly on the law. Very interesting, because the cases were almost identical, but the outcomes were polar opposites. One judge followed the law, the other judge followed her feelings, her heart. She knew that it would be unfair to saddle that guy with that much child support when he had been living with that mother, married to her, and raising that child. It's a very interesting contrast. But it goes to show you that many times who you have as a judge makes all the difference in the world. Judges are human. Some judges will rule one way, other judges another.
Local divorce attorney warns men not to marry higher earning women. In specific, what she means are women who earn higher than them. Here's what's interesting, and I'm about to play the video where she goes into detail about why marriages with higher earning women don't work, right? Here's what's interesting. She's a divorce attorney, and for the longest time, she made content mainly targeting women. Why? Because we know that women initiate 70% of divorces, right? So for the longest time, she was making content for women. And at one point, she got asked the question. I did a video about this. Her audience had a question for her. They wanted to know, what are the top, I think, 3 professions that men choose that really don't work out for marriages, right? Like, avoid these men. A lot of them were in military, law enforcement. And then she made one for the women, right? And she said, I don't want to do this, because she knew what would come with it. And of course, they didn't like that coffee.
No, I'll have a tea, actually.
So let's get into it. In this video, she explains why marriages with higher earning women don't work without any further delay. Let's get it.
My last videos have sparked some interesting discussion about different types of marriage dynamics and what works and what doesn't. And so one of the more common ones that was asked about was a situation where a woman earns more money than the man and what that situation looks like. So I'm going to tell you 3 reasons why I think that marriages where women earn more than men, or where men don't work. Number 1 is, as I mentioned in my last video, men need to feel valued. And I think that when women earn more than men, it has a tendency to emasculate men. I think that they are ingrained within the society to think, I have to earn, I have to provide, right? Men are hunters and gatherers, and they're supposed to provide. And I think that it kind of upsets the natural balance for the woman to be carrying that weight, because, sorry to say this, but a lot of women who work also carry a lot of weight in the home. So I think that adds to it. So even regardless of whether or not you have kids, I think a woman carrying more of the financial weight not only tends to emasculate the man, but also can cause more resentment to build in a woman that would build in a man in the reverse situation, where the man is the higher income earner.
So I have to say this. So she's coming from a place where she says, when a woman earns more, you're throwing things off balance. Why? Because men are providers, right? Men are providers. And the resentment doesn't come from the men. It mostly comes from a woman. And a woman is saying this. Well, that's what's beautiful about this whole thing, right? One thing I notice is that women tend to shut up more when they hear it from a woman. Would they agree with her? Probably not, but I don't see them deflecting as much. They can't use the whole like, oh, that's the problem with men. You're insecure. You're intimidated by boss babes, right? But they see a woman like this and they're like, oh, you traitor. What are you doing? Telling the truth. They don't like that coffee.
Put that coffee down.
Number 2 is that the men in these situations that are married to high-powered women, a lot of times, in the ones that I've seen fail, the men tend to be very, for lack of a better word, not motivated. They tend to be, they might be educated, but they don't tend to work very hard. They don't really seem to have a passion for anything.
Say it.
They tend to be lazy.
We know what you're trying to say.
And they tend to kind of rely on the woman
to
run the household.
Beta male. Beta male, dog. That's what she doesn't want to say. Beta males. Beta males, right, tend to be lazy, tend to not take charge of their life. Plenty of people out here don't like the idea of alpha males and beta males, right? The idea that there's sort of these hierarchies within men. But the problem is that people don't usually understand this stuff, right? When I talk about alpha, a lot of times it's contextual. In the context of your woman, you're not going to be an alpha to every woman who you come in contact with. How does the woman that you choose to deal with view you? She's talking about a man who lets a woman take charge of her household. She's talking about a beta, bro. Let's get back into it.
I mean, she does the bills, she does the finances, she takes care of the kids if there are any. She kind of is the CEO of the household. They just don't seem to really contribute much. It's the opposite of a traditional stay-at-home mom dynamic where the mom is running the household and the husband is working every day and paying for the expenses. The woman in that situation tends to do it all. And so I just think that over time it just weighs on her and she's just like, I'm out of here. Or the man will cheat, as in my last video. And then finally, what's really interesting about these divorces is they tend to be the cheapest. Women who are the breadwinners,
listen up,
they're
guys.
Protecting their money. I mean, men do too, but not like the women do. And they tend to really push their husbands behind the scenes to settle. They tend to have to pay the entire bill, and they don't want to pay that bill. So they keep the process really streamlined and quiet. So
personally, I think she did a really good job explaining why marriages with high earning women don't work. What I really want to also focus on is what she said at the end. She said the type of divorces where the woman turns to be the breadwinner, she turns to be the higher earning person within a marriage, are the cheapest divorces. She says because women really hold on to that money, right? And when you understand female nature, when you're RP aware, it makes sense. It makes sense when you understand that women are takers, not givers, right? They're gatherers. She takes resources. So there's a couple of problems I see there. Not only are you in a position where she doesn't respect you, right? Because remember what she said, most of the times it's the women that build resentment. You might think, oh, I'm secure. It doesn't matter what you think, bro. Female nature will always win. If she does not respect you, what? She's going to initiate the divorce. She's going to leave you. Why? Because she doesn't matter how much she loves you. If there's no respect there, if she's building resentment, doesn't matter how secure you are in the fact that your woman earns more money than you. Most women will either one, think they can do better than you because of hypergamy, because they look at you and you're lazy, right? I think here's another part of this, right? The guys that are out here and think they don't have to try and love is going to get them through, right? I'm going to be the stay-at-home dad and it's all good. That shit doesn't work, bro. When you're talking about it, right? When you're in love and you're talking about how, oh, don't worry, babe, you won't have to do any of that. You can be a stay-at-home dad and I make more money than you and it's all good. It sounds like a good idea, but people forget human nature exists, female nature exists, male nature exists. Right? When it comes to actually practicing that out, many people don't know themselves. And a lot of women especially, right, are blind to themselves, or they think, oh, I'm different. I'm going to make this work. So like I was saying, not only are you prone to being emasculated by a woman growing resentful because she earns more than you, but you also leave the marriage with peanuts, right? Because women are master gatherers. And you're going to feel obligated to let her take it because your natural propensity as a man who's a provider is to say, you know what, she probably needs it more than me. You lose on both ends, right? And I don't like that coffee.
This coffee smells like shit.
Dad got custody of his son when his son was about 10 years old. Dad raised his child, fed, clothed, and sheltered him. Didn't get any child support from mom. You know why? Because he didn't want it. He just simply wanted to raise his son without any hassles, without any kind of problems with the mother. Mom would get visitation when she wanted it. Didn't get that much, but did get some, but never paid child support. Well, move forward 5 years. Kid's now 15 years old. He wants to go live with mom. He and dad got crossways about some things, so he figures he'll give mom another shot. So mom gets custody of the kid. Guess what? The first thing mom does is goes down and puts dad on child support.
Oh my
Even though
goodness.
dad never put her on child support when he had custody, first thing mom does, put
This
dad on
coffee
child
smells
support.
like
So now
shit.
dad's paying about $850 a month in child support for this 15-year-old kid
Insane.
that he raised without any help from mom for the last 5 years. Just doesn't seem fair, does it?
Female nature.
Dad was paying mom about $650 a month in child support. Problem was is that when the child support was set, mom was only making about $12,000 a month. That was 3 years ago. Now she's a college graduate and she's making $60,000 a year. Well, Dad called Mom up and said, look, you're making more money now. I need to lower my child support. I should only be paying about $300 a month. Mom disagreed and said, no, I want the full $650. Well, Dad had to hire a lawyer, take Mom to court. They fought it out in court. When all the dust settled and the smoke cleared, the judge agreed with Dad and set the child support at the amount of $350. Now, here's the problem. There's a little-known statute that says that Dad cannot get attorney fees from Mom if Mom is receiving government assistance for child support purposes. Dad ended up having to pay Mom's attorney $2,500 for having to go to court to lower his child support. Doesn't seem fair, does it? You want to hear something crazy? Put yourself on child support. If you're the father of a child born out of wedlock,
that's insane.
You need to put yourself on child support as soon as possible. If you don't, it's going to come back to bite you. Either the mom is going to put you on child support or the state is going to put you on child support. Chances are you're going to be on child support at some
This
point.
coffee smells
if you
like
wait
shit.
too long, then you're going to have a huge arrearage, 25, 50. Biggest one I ever saw was a $120,000 child support arrearage for child support that was never paid that should have been. Now, I'm going to tell you something really crazy. Even if you're living with the mother of your child and you guys are in love, not married, but in love and living together, put yourself on child support. If you do that in that situation, it's kind of circular. It comes right back into the family. If you ever break up with her, there's no question that you paid child support, and that's important. Do you think you can change somebody after you marry them? A lot of people think they can, but very rarely do. You know, I've heard the old adage, if you want a better wife, be a better husband. Or if you want a better husband, be a better wife. I don't actually think that's true, though. Very rarely do I see people that are able to change somebody just by changing themselves. There are exceptions, but most of the time you can't do that.
Some
Most
sound
of the time
advice.
You're going to be stuck with whoever it is you marry. A lot of people go into a marriage thinking, well, I'll change these bad traits about this person, but they end up not doing it. You know, we go through a dating period usually before we get married, and that's the time period that we learn who that person truly is. And once you learn who a person truly is and understand that you can't change them, then as long as you're satisfied with that other person, then go ahead and marry them. Otherwise, you better not. A number of years ago, I had a client that fell into what I call the child support black hole. What that is where a father will get behind on his child support. In this case, the father owed about $600 a month in child support for 3 kids from 2 different women. That was his ongoing child support. Well, he began to fall behind because he would lose jobs. He would get jobs that paid cash and he wouldn't pay the money to child support. He even did a little stint in jail for DUI. Well, when the Grim Reaper of child support finally showed up at his doorstep, he owed about $40,000 in child support, back child support, arrears.
Wow.
There was no way he was ever going to be able to pay that. Well, what the child support office did was every time he would get a job making money at a factory or a company, they would issue a wage assignment. And with that wage assignment, they would take about 50% of his earnings. So if he was getting paid $12 an hour, child support would take $6 of that $12. And after taxes, that would leave him about $3 or $4 an hour to live on, not enough to live on.
It's ridiculous.
His incentive to make money and to pay child support was completely shot. It was gone.
Of course.
His incentive to be a father was gone because he couldn't provide for his kids. So he rarely saw his kids. He wasn't really a father to them. What he ended up doing was dropping out of society. He got menial jobs, making cash money. If he did get a job at a factory or someplace that would report his income and his employment and a wage assignment issued, he'd quit and go work somewhere else because he couldn't handle only getting $3 or $4.
It's sad.
I don't know what the answer is in that case, but when he hits 80 years old, if he's still alive, he's going to owe tens of thousands of dollars in child support.
That's terrible.
What I mean by that is he'll never get it paid off. What do you think the solution is to that? If there is a solution, and there may not be. And I believe that all parents should
change the laws, maybe,
if they're able. But when you put somebody in that big of a detriment as it relates to child support, they're going to lose all incentive to be a father, to be a provider for their kids. What do you think the solution is? You got any ideas? John's child support almost doubled without him even realizing it. The way he found out is he woke up one morning, checked his bank account, expecting to see a deposit for $1,350 for payroll, and instead it was only $800. He had been paying $650 a month in child support for 3 kids for the last 6 years. Well, child support office wanted to increase that. They thought he was making more money. So they filed a motion with the court to increase his child support and sent a copy to his last known address. Problem is, John had moved and hadn't given them his new address. When it got to court, child support said, we mailed him a copy. Judge said, okay, he's not here. So what the judge did is increased his income by 10% each year, which the statute allows. That increased his income for child support purposes substantially, which in turn increased his child support from $650 to $1,200 a month. Wow. John could have avoided all this if he had only given child support office his new address when he moved. Tom and Jennifer had been married for about 3 years and had known each other for about 4 years. Jennifer had a 2-year-old daughter named Madison when she started dating Tom. Madison was 6 now, and she and Tom had grown close. They both wanted Tom to adopt her. Madison's natural father had been out of the picture since she was about a year old. Now, although he was ordered to pay child support, he hadn't paid any support or even seen her since Jennifer and him broke up. He owed about $35,000 in back child support. Once his parental rights are terminated and the adoption goes through, he's not going to owe any more child support going forward, but he's still going to owe the arrearage, the back child support. The adoption went through without a hitch, and after that, Jennifer started to pursue the back child support through the child support office. As it turned out, Madison's father had been injured on the job and had a pending workers' compensation case.
Oh, no.
The state child support agency placed a lien against that workers' compensation settlement, and when his case settled, guess what? Jennifer received the entire $35,000 in back child support. It's important to keep in mind that although child support
This coffee
terminates
smells like shit.
when the parental rights of a parent terminates and there's an adoption, what was owed prior to that is still owed and can still be enforced and collected.
Nightmare.
In this case, the state continued to enforce the child support arrearage and collect it, even though father's parental rights had been terminated. Now, although the $35,000 was technically Jennifer's, she and Tom agreed to put it in a college fund for Madison so she could go to college when she turned 18. In a lot of cases I've handled through the years, adoptive parents will simply abandon whatever child support arrearage is owed by the natural father and go on with their life. What would you do in that case? Would you pursue the back child support? Would you place it in a fund for the child to use when the child turns 18? Or would you simply abandon the money and move on with your life? Or would you take the money and use it for yourself, which you have a right to do? Did you know that if you're found to have committed an act of violence against the other parent of your children, that your parenting time will be limited by the court? Here's a common scenario. 2 parties that are parents of children get into an argument. It becomes physical at some point. The police are called and you're arrested and taken to jail. Now, you may be found guilty of domestic assault, or you may have an order of protection put against you for those same acts of violence that form the basis of the criminal charge. Either way, you now have a finding by a court that you committed an act of domestic violence. And the law in Tennessee, as in most states, requires the court that sets custody and visitation to limit your parenting time based on either the order of protection or a finding of guilt in a criminal case. Be very careful with these orders of protection and with pleading guilty in criminal cases
Very common.
to acts of domestic violence, because it can and will affect your parenting time. I had a case a few years ago where the dad was working at a big company as a mechanic, making good money, almost $100,000 a year. Well, he did something wrong. He falsified records and he ends up getting fired. Well, there's a child support case pending at that time. And so when the case went to trial, we were able to show, and I was representing the mom at this time, but we were able to show that he was fired for misconduct, and that when he was fired, he was making close to $100,000 a year. And we were able to argue that the court should use that amount as his income for child support purposes.
Wow.
The court agreed.
No
Here's
way.
the situation. When you have lost your job because of some fault of your own, either misconduct or whatever the reason, the judge is still going to be able to use the amount of money that you were earning at the time of that misconduct, the time you were fired,
Nightmare.
as your income for child support purposes. John was a 55-year-old senior airlines captain making over $250,000 a year. He had a 6-year-old little boy and he was on his 3rd marriage. He had just finished paying child support for his 2 oldest children who had
3rd
aged
marriage?
out,
Come on,
and
dog.
had just finished paying alimony to his 2nd wife. Now, all of a sudden, his third wife, the mother of his 6-year-old son, has filed for divorce, wants to get out for whatever reason. Well, he's fed up with the system. He's disgusted. He's jaded. He's been paying child support and alimony for the last 25 years. Damn. He's tired of it. He quits his job so he won't have to pay child support or alimony. Bad decision on John's part. Here's the deal. If you are capable of making money, that's what the court is going to look at. Your earning ability, not what you're actually earning. So when John quit his job as an airline captain, guess what? The judge is still going to count that as income, the amount that he was making as an airline captain, because he quit that job voluntarily. And believe it or not, on his exit interview, what did he tell the interviewer? That he was quitting because he was sick and tired of having to pay alimony and child support.
Sounds like he just
and when
gave up.
the judge saw that, he really had no choice but to impute that income to him, the income he was making as an airline pilot. Yeah, he ends up having to pay $2,100 a month in child support. Doesn't seem fair, but at the same time, it does seem fair, doesn't it?
No.
Why doesn't the court require the parent receiving child support to give an accounting of where that money's being spent? It's a very good question, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it. You know, most parents will tell you that they don't like paying child support to the other parent because they have no control over what happens with that money. And many people believe that the other parent is wasting that money, spending it on things other than the children, and many times that's the case. You know, in guardianship
hair,
cases,
weave.
if you're appointed a guardian over a child and over the estate of that child, you have to give an accounting every year as to where that money goes, a detailed accounting. Why don't we require that of parents who receive child support?
Gynocentric
in divorce
society.
cases, at least in Tennessee, when we file a divorce case, there's an injunction that goes in place that requires the other parent, or really both parents, to give an accounting of where all the money that they spend goes, and to provide that accounting when requested by the other party. I think the court should require that in the case of child support as well. Mom was pregnant when she got married. Her husband knew it wasn't his biological child, but went ahead and accepted the child as his own anyway and signed the birth certificate, thinking, hey, we're going to live together from this point forward.
Beta move.
We'll be one big happy family. He was wrong. They separated after a
Surprise.
year. The problem is nobody filed for divorce. They didn't have the money at the time. He went his way, she went hers. They each started dating different people as if they were never married. Well, she ended up having 4 more children over the next 10 years. None of whom were his biological children.
This coffee
and they were
smells
all by
like
different
shit.
guys. So now she's got 5 different guys, none of whom are his biological children.
Sheesh.
The problem is the law presumes that they are his children. Now if he files for divorce, he's going to end up owing child support for 5 children, none of whom are his biological children. And he runs the risk of having to pay retroactive child support back to the date of separation. Damn. What he should have done is he should have filed for divorce when he separated. That would have been the easy solution. Now he's got a much more complicated problem. If a judge puts you on child support, only a judge can take you off of child support. I'm going to say that again. It's that important. If a judge has put you on child support, only a judge can take you off of child support. Here's what I mean by that. Take a typical situation where you'll have a child born out of wedlock. The mom and dad are together when the child is born. They separate. Mom puts dad on child support, goes to court. The judge sets the child support, bangs the gavel, says, Dad, you got to pay this amount every month through the state. All right, move forward a couple of months. The parties get back together. Mom goes down to the child support office and says, hey, I want to take dad off child support. Well, the child support office stops enforcing child support, but they can't take dad off of child support. Only a judge can do that. What should have happened is dad should have petitioned the court and said, hey, we're back together.
Free
Take
game.
me off of child support. There'd be a hearing set before a judge. The judge would have then taken dad off child support.
Free game.
I had a case a few years ago. I was representing the husband. It was about a 10-year marriage. And throughout that entire marriage, the wife was the one that was responsible for paying all of the bills. Husband worked, wife didn't. Wife stayed home with the kids. Wife took care of the business of the house, including paying all the bills. Problem was is she wasn't paying the bills. Husband had no clue. He didn't care anything about the finances. Well, it turned out that she hadn't been paying the house note. And guess what? The house went into foreclosure. That's when he reached out to me. That's when he found out there were real problems going on with her. Folks, the takeaway from that is you've got to keep up with the finances. Whether you're the one writing the bills or not, you've got to know what the bills are. You've got to know what's coming in, what's going out, what credit cards are being used. I see so many times in so many cases, one spouse being in control of the money and the other one having absolutely no clue. He had to file bankruptcy in that case, completely ruined his credit. John was the father of two little girls, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, when he and his wife got divorced. He was ordered to pay child support of about $800 a month. This went on for about 8 years. 8 years into the divorce, the oldest child turned 18 and graduated from high school. John at that point felt like his child support should be cut in half and he should only be paying $400 because now he was only going to be supporting one child. What he didn't take into consideration was the fact that the guidelines, at least in Tennessee, as in most states, don't cut child support in half. For each child that you have in addition to the first child, you pay less and less of a percentage of your income for that additional child. Well, he didn't take that into account, nor did he take into account that his income had increased substantially over that 8-year period. John ended up paying $950 a month in child support for one child. In other words, his child support increased instead of decreased.
Horrific.
John was the father of two little girls, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, when he and his wife got divorced. He was ordered to pay child support of about $800 a month. This went on for about 8 years. 8 years into the divorce, the oldest child turned 18 and graduated from high school. John at that point felt like his child support should be cut in half and he should only be paying $400 because now he was only going to be supporting one child. What he didn't take into consideration was the fact that the guidelines, at least in Tennessee, as in most states, don't cut child support in half. For each child that you have in addition to the first child, you pay less and less of a percentage of your income for that additional child. Well, he didn't take that into account, nor did he take into account that his income had increased substantially over that 8-year period. John ended up paying $950 a month in child support for one child. In other words, his child support increased instead of decreasing. I know why you don't like to pay child support. It's because when you pay that money over to the other parent, you lose control. You lose a say on where that money's going to be spent. It's not that you don't want to support your kids. Of course you do. You want to buy them food. You want to make sure they're sheltered. You want to make sure they're clothed properly. But when you pay money, hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a month in child support, you lose a say in how that money's spent. And the other parent could spend it on cigarettes, on alcohol, on all sorts of things. There's really not much you can do about that.
Back massages.
Except in very rare cases where maybe money's being spent on drugs, illegal drugs, the court is not going to get involved. The court's not going to require an accounting of the other parent on where that money's spent. And that's why it's so difficult to accept paying child support to the other parent. Bob and Julie got married in the state of Kentucky, where they continued to live together for about 10 years. Then Bob became disenchanted, left the marriage, left Kentucky, moved to Tennessee. When he was in Tennessee, he met a woman and he fell in love with her. Problem is, he didn't tell her about his marriage to Julie, and he knew that if he filed for divorce against Julie, that she was going to make it very difficult and drag it out. Bob wanted to marry his new girlfriend, though. So what he did is he went to court in Tennessee, filed an affidavit claiming he didn't know where Julie was, had looked for her but couldn't find her. So the court ordered publication of notice. After about 60 days, he went to court. He got a default judgment divorce against Julie. About 30 days later, he married his girlfriend. Well, somebody saw pictures on the internet of the two of them together, told Julie about it. Julie did a little investigation, came to Tennessee, hired a lawyer, got the divorce case set aside. That meant he was still married to Julie. That voided his marriage to his girlfriend. Dad was a neurosurgeon, making about $500,000 a year. Mom, on the other hand, was only making about $50,000 a year. They had a 4-year-old little boy. Now, this was in 2003. They went through a divorce, and the court granted father custody of the little boy. Mom got about 120 days of parenting time. The real kicker came, though, when the court went to calculate child support. In 2003, the courts were using what's called a straight percentage method for calculating child support. And when they did that, they only looked at mom's income, since she was the non-custodial parent, and took a percentage of that income and set child support. Mom ended up paying Dad $850 a month in child support. Well, move forward a couple of years.
Beautiful.
The law changed in Tennessee. Now Tennessee uses an income shares model where the court looks at the income of both parents. Mom went back to court, asked for a modification of child support based on that new law, and guess what? She left with Dad owing her $1,900 a month in child support going forward. Don't adopt your stepchild until you understand the legal ramifications
Free game.
of the adoption that you're about to
Free game, man. Listen up.
and that you are willing to accept that responsibility. Most cases of step-parent adoption are wonderful. You can inherit from that child and that child from you. You can be legally responsible for the actions of that child in certain situations. You might end up having to pay child support. You can get custody and visitation rights once you adopt a child. So as long as you understand what you're doing, it can be a wonderful thing. I was in child support court a couple of weeks ago, and the case in front of mine involved a father who was working two jobs, one about 40 hours a week, the other between 15 and 20. He was making about $65,000 a year, and that was his income for child support purposes. The problem is that Mom was only working 20 hours a week, a third the time that Dad was working. She was bringing in about $25,000 a year, and that was going to be her income for child support purposes. Well, Dad's attorney argued to the court very eloquently that the court should impute Mom's income at $75,000. If Mom's only working 20 hours, that's a third of what Dad's working. So if you multiply 3 times the $25,000 that Mom was bringing in, that'd be $75,000. Seems only fair, doesn't it? Well, the court didn't buy it. The court kept Mom's income at $25,000 and Dad's at $65,000. Dad had a huge child support bill. Doesn't seem fair, does it? John got behind in child support and spent 8 months in jail. Can you believe it? What had happened was he missed a few payments of child support, and his ex-wife took him back to court on a contempt charge. The judge heard the evidence, looked at him and said, "You've just simply refused to pay. You've had the ability to pay. You've just willfully refused and failed to pay. Therefore, I'm going to lock you up until you pay the child support that's owed." It was about $2,500 that he was behind. So the judge locked him up, and instead of paying the money, he took the attitude of, "I'll show this judge." So he ended up sitting in jail for 8 months until he finally came to his senses and paid the child support that was owed. You know, on a contempt charge, a judge can lock you up and put you in jail for an indefinite period of time until you make a purge payment. In this case, it was
Horrific.
the entire amount of the child support that was owed. That's perfectly legal, happens every day. Dad left about a year before Mom filed for divorce. When Dad left, he continued to pay the bills. He continued to pay the electric bill, the phone bill, the cable bill, all of the bills of the house he continued to pay because that's what he had always done. Now, Mom worked. They had 2 kids. One kid was 3 and one kid was 5. Well, when Mom filed for divorce, Dad decided on his own that he just wasn't going to pay any more bills. Why should he? Mom's filed for divorce. They're not going to get back together. Mom's living in the house. She's enjoying the electricity. She's got the kids. Why should he have to pay the bills? So he didn't. Well, guess what? The electricity got turned off. That was the wrong move on his part. How was he going to explain to the judge that he allowed the electricity to get turned off in the house after his wife filed for divorce and after he had been paying those bills for a whole year? It's not going to go too well for him. Guys, be careful when you do things like that. Don't knee-jerk once a divorce is filed, decide you're not going to pay anything. That's the wrong move. I have a common scenario that comes up all the time. Dads call me up and they'll say, "Hey, I hadn't seen my kid in 2 years." Well, my first question is, why not? And usually they say, "Mom won't let me see my kid." Well, do you have a court order? Yeah, I'm supposed to have every other weekend. Well, what the hell have you been doing for 2 years? Well, I don't know. She won't let me see my kid. Look, if you've got parenting time with your kid and you're not getting that parenting time because someone won't let you have that parenting time, you better take that person back to court and get them held in contempt so that they understand that this is your parenting time.
Free game.
Here's how I look at this. If you're given parenting time by a judge every other weekend from Friday at 6 to Sunday at 6, and on your weekend at 8 p.m. on Saturday, you don't know where your kid is, then you're neglecting your child because that child is your responsibility during your weekend that the judge has given you parenting time. And if you're not taking care of your child during that time period, you're neglecting your child. So an old client calls me up the other day and he says, "Hey man, I've got a child support hearing coming up in a couple of weeks. Can you represent me again? See, I'd represented this guy a few years ago, and I'd gotten him parenting time with his kids. The mom had been denying him time, so we went into court and we got parenting time. He got every other weekend, standard visitation, and that's what he wanted. So I asked him, I said, well, how are your kids doing? How's your parenting time going? He said, I hadn't been getting my parenting time, man. I said, what the world's wrong, man? How come you haven't been getting your parenting time? Why didn't you call me about that? He said, well, I just don't like messing with the mom. She just makes it so difficult for me to exercise my parenting.
Very common.
Look, guys, if you're given parenting time by the court and somebody tries to mess with that parenting time, the other parent or whoever, go back to court on a contempt. This is your time with your kids. Don't let anybody mess with that time. You have an absolute right to visit with your children. Jerome had been bad. So bad that he had to go to jail for 10 years. When he was in jail for 5 years, his wife, who he had married before he went to jail and never divorced, got pregnant, had a baby. Now, Jerome had been in jail for 5 years, so it couldn't be Jerome's baby. But under the law presumes that that is his child. And the only way to change that is through DNA testing. So what Jerome's wife had to do to disestablish paternity in Jerome,
now that's crazy,
was to have a DNA test that excluded Jerome as being the father of that child,
coffee
even though
smells
he was
like
in jail
shit.
when that child was both conceived and born. So when she wanted to put the biological father on child support, she had to first disestablish paternity in Jerome and then establish paternity in the biological father. I see this happen all the time. Don't use children as pawns. I get calls all the time from fathers telling me that mothers are refusing to give fathers parenting time with their children, absent a court order, when the father has maybe done something wrong or said something wrong or hadn't done something the mom wanted the father to do. And so what the mom does is withhold the child. And I've seen it happen for months at a time until father can finally get the money together to hire an attorney and go to court and rectify the situation. I'm telling you, this usually is moms that do this. Moms, when you do
Thanks
that,
for keeping
you
it
put
real,
yourself
Emily.
at a disadvantage, and here's why. One of the factors the court is going to look at in determining custody, visitation, parenting time, etc., is the propensity of both parents to foster a relationship with the other parent. And when you're acting like that and you're holding the child away from the other parent, the father, because he hadn't done something or has done something, you put yourself at a real disadvantage.
She wants a divorce and believes her husband is hiding a dark secret. We're about to find out what that is. No more wasting time. Let's get it.
Today is just one of those days where I'm like, I'm just too good at my job. So let's talk about my day at work. So I have this divorce case, like always. And in this particular case, I represent the wife. So my client, she just knew her husband was cheating, but she could not physically catch him.
Right.
He keeps doing things like changing his cell phone password, and she's seeing random things on his credit card statements, like hotel transactions and random gifts that he's not getting her. So I told her, don't worry about it. I have one of the best private investigators in Texas. If there's something to be found, we'll find it. So after about a month of investigating, we like to be thorough. My PI sends me back the report. So in the report, my PI is like, he spends a lot of time at this particular address for long hours late at night. So as I'm flipping through the pages of the report, I finally stumble upon photos. So my PI had already told me, of course, there's no way for them to know what's going on inside of the home, but that to keep looking because there's a photo and a kiss. So I'm flipping and flipping through the pages, looking at the photos, and I get closer, and I was like, is that who I think it is? So there's this photo of the husband leaving the residence around 1 a.m. and he turns around to kiss the woman, and the woman looks very familiar. So I pull my hair back to see clearly. So I'm staring at the photo and I'm like, I know that's not my opposing counsel. I know that's not his divorce attorney.
So this guy was caught with his attorney. It can't be good. It can't be good for you, man. Let's keep watching.
Ooh, I done seen it all. So now I'm about to go draft and file a motion to disqualify Miss Ma'am, because now I'm going to turn you into one of my witnesses. You can't be the lawyer and a witness on the case at the same time. My client was very adamant that I needed to talk about this today. I think she wants her husband to stumble across this video. Well, off I go. I am a very busy lady. It's time for me to go ruin someone's weekend. I'll see you in part 2. Bye.
Yo, what? This is insane. You know, guys, there has to be a certain amount of discipline
if you're in a situation like this, I mean, you are playing with fire. It can't go good from here on out. I don't see how things get better from here on out. So she can't be an attorney if she's sexually involved, the person who she's representing, right? She can't represent him in court is what I was hearing. What do you guys think of this? As always, I was curious to see what the people had to say. Let's check out a few of these comments. First comment says, the way my jaw dropped. Another person here says, gotta pay for his attorney somehow, I guess. 21K. Another person here added, I thought you were going to say that it was the wife. Yeah, I kind of thought that was going to be it too. It took me a minute to realize that she was talking about his attorney. And she went on to ask the divorce attorney with the face palm. Another person here added and says, the tea I didn't know I needed. No, you need coffee, man.
Drink the coffee, it'll make you feel better.
Creator responded and says, sip up. Another comment here says, not ruin someone's weekend with laughing emojis. Next, surprise emojis. Well. Laughing emojis. And finally, our last comment says, OMG, shocked. No way. Yes way. Sexual discipline is important, man.
Better.
So guys, this is Divorce Horror Stories Part 2. Let's get into it.
Mom and Dad were the unmarried parents of a 5-year-old little boy. They lived together the first year of the child's life, and then they separated. They entered into an agreement that they wrote out and both signed, giving Dad every other weekend. He exercised his parenting time religiously, didn't miss a single weekend. Mom decides after the child turns 5 that she's going to move to Florida, so she ups and moves. Doesn't tell Dad until she gets down there.
Terrible.
Calls him up and says, hey, by the way, I moved to Florida. Sorry. Well, Dad goes down to court and asks the judge to issue an order ordering Mom to come back with the child. Well, the judge says, have you got anything giving you parenting time? He says, yeah, I got a written agreement. We both signed it. Judge says, yeah, but is it an order from the court? Did the court sign it?
Free
Dad
game.
says, no. Judge says, did you establish paternity? He said, well, I signed the birth certificate. Judge says, is there an order establishing paternity? Father says, no. Judge says, sorry, nothing I can do. Point here is that if you're a father, especially in Tennessee, you've got to have an order establishing paternity before you can have rights to your child. Over $19 million is what it cost Frank and Jamie McCourt in attorney fees to get divorced over a decade ago. He was worth a lot of money, owned the Dodgers at the time, worth several $100 million. So that didn't seem like a lot to them, but that is a lot of money in attorney fees. Most divorces that I'm aware of, even if they're contested, cost several $1,000s at least, and they can go up a lot higher than that. You know, there are a lot of things you can do to cut down on the attorney fees and the cost of your divorce case. One of the things you can do is limit the number of phone calls you make to your attorney. The best thing you can do, though, is to try to work out every single thing you possibly can with your spouse. That way the attorneys don't have much to fight about, really. Another thing you can do is if you have a bunch of financial documents, don't just give them to your attorney and expect him or her to go through them. Go through them yourself and try to put them all in a spreadsheet. That saves a lot of time. There are a lot of things you can do like that to save on attorney fees in divorce. Step-parents have absolutely no rights to their stepchildren. Case in point, a few years ago, a mother allowed her new husband, the stepfather of a child, to corporally punish a child. Well, the father found out about it and was absolutely livid. He filed a petition in court with his lawyer asking that the court remove that step-parent from that child's life until there could be a full hearing.
Wow.
The court agreed and removed the step-parent from the child's life initially and then held a full hearing. And at that hearing, the court determined that that step-parent posed such a risk of harm to the child by corporally punishing the child that he should never be around that child again. That caused some real problems between the mother and the stepfather.
Date a single mother if you want.
Mom eventually divorced the stepfather so that she could have a normal relationship.
She will always put the family first.
The court said in its ruling that step-parents have no constitutional or statutory rights to their stepchildren.
You will come last.
John was only 9 years old when he got the devastating news that the man that had raised him his whole life, that he thought was his father, was really not his biological father. You see, John's parents had been having marital difficulties about the time that John was conceived, and John's mom stepped out on his dad and had an affair with an old boy.
She belongs to the streets.
Well, the result was that she got pregnant. Didn't tell anybody, even her husband.
304.
Who began to raise John as his own, thinking that that was his child. Well, as the child got older, he began to look like that old boyfriend. People started talking, asking questions. Well, the old boyfriend did too. The old boyfriend decided he was going to file a petition asking the court to allow him to have a DNA test.
Pookie wanted his baby.
He was, in fact, a biological father. But the court refused to establish the parent-child relationship between him and John because of the length of time and because of the relationship that had already been established in the bond between the legal father, the one that had been raising him, and John. What do you think about that?
Wow.
Mom died in a horrible car wreck, leaving a 12-year-old little girl to be raised by a father that little girl barely knew, somebody that hadn't had much at all to do with her throughout her entire life. When Mom died, Dad owed Mom about $25,000 in back child support. Well, guess what? The state pursued that. They began to collect that money for Mother's estate.
Wow.
And here's where it gets crazy. Mother had a will, and in that will, Mother had left every bit of her estate, everything, to another daughter, a child that was older that she had had by a previous relationship, and left none of it to the 12-year-old little girl. So now this man is raising this 12-year-old little girl. He's having to pay all of this back child support to the estate of the mother, and then the estate pays it out to another child who has nothing to do with that particular situation.
Story.
It doesn't seem fair. That's one of the craziest cases I've ever had dealing with child support.
Wow.
I cannot get you any more custody than you already have. I tell single moms of children born out of wedlock that all the time. In Tennessee, if you're a single mom of a child born out of wedlock, you have sole and exclusive custody of that child. You have sole and exclusive decision-making authority. You can decide when and even if the other parent gets to see that child. Now, many times mothers in that situation will call me up and say, hey, I want a parenting schedule from the court giving the father parenting time, a set schedule, because he's bugging the heck out of me to see the kids. And I tell moms, I say, you may not want to do that. You would be giving your authority to the court to make that decision. Right now, you're the sole and exclusive decision maker.
Lenley, which side are you on?
Stirring up a hornet's nest. You may not want to rock the boat because the court, in some situations, could even change custody and give custody to the father. You may not want that to happen. Be satisfied with what you got. Bob had a girlfriend, which would normally be a good thing, except Bob was married. Wife found out about the girlfriend, and about 2 months later, Bob was out of the house in the apartment with the girlfriend. Wife had filed for divorce. About 6 months later, the case was set for mediation. Now, interestingly enough, negotiations had gone really well up to this point, and both attorneys thought the case was going to settle in mediation. So Bob's wife went to the mediation with her attorney, and Bob went to the mediation with his attorney and his girlfriend. Blew up. Why in the world he thought that would be a good thing or be beneficial to him, I don't know. But the mediation lasted about 30 minutes and fell apart.
She didn't like that coffee.
Negotiations back by 2 or 3 months. I don't know why people think that it's okay to bring your boyfriend or girlfriend to the mediation, court hearing, child support hearings when you're going through a divorce. That does nothing but fuel the flames. Dad is ordered to pay child support of $650 a month. Well, Dad loses his job and gets behind by a couple of months. So what does Mom do? She files a contempt petition against Dad. It's set 30 days out.
Evil.
Dad hires a lawyer, goes to court. He's found in contempt because he's behind. He's ordered to pay a $1,000 purge payment. That really makes Dad mad. You know why? Because a couple of years before that, Mom had denied Dad his parenting time for 3 times in a row, 3 weeks in a row. And Dad took Mom to court. You know how long it took to get that hearing? It took about a year before the court let Dad have a hearing on his contempt. You know what happened when he had the contempt hearing? You think Mom went to jail? No.
Of course not.
Slap on the wrist. That doesn't seem fair, does it?
No.
Dad was livid. Dad asked the question, if I get behind on child support, I'm treated like a criminal.
You go to jail.
If Mom denies me parenting time in violation of the order, she gets a slap on the wrist. It's just not fair. It was Dad's weekend to have parenting time. But Mom called Dad up and said, hey, you can't see your kids this weekend. I know it's your weekend, but we got plans. Dad said, what are you talking about? Mom said, we got plans. You can't see your kids this weekend. Sorry, click. Dad was furious. Monday morning, Dad hired a lawyer. The lawyer filed a contempt petition against Mom for Mom denying Dad his parenting time in violation of the order. The case went to trial. At trial, Mom won. You know why? Because Dad never
she's a woman.
To pick his kids up.
Oh,
you see, Dad had every
sorry.
other weekend, Friday from 6 p.m. to Sunday at 6 p.m. Had Dad gone to pick the kid up at 6 p.m. on Friday, as is ordered and as is his scheduled time, and Mom had then denied him parenting time, then he would have won that case. But just because mom called him on Wednesday and told him that he couldn't have parenting time didn't necessarily mean he couldn't have parenting time. What dad should have done is gone and tried to pick the kid up Friday at 6.
Free game.
I was in court the other day waiting my turn, and I was listening to the judge make a ruling in a custody case. There was a mother and a father. They had gone through a divorce, and the judge was about to rule on the custody issue. They had one child, about 5 years old. Mom was about 29. Dad was probably about the same age, maybe a little bit older. Well, when the judge made his ruling, he gave Dad primary residential parent status. Dad had 245 days, and Mom had 120 days. Mom jumped up and yelled out at the judge, "How could you take my child away from me? That's my child." I got to thinking about that.
Sounds about
Was
right.
that really her child for the judge to take away? What about Dad? Wasn't that his child too? One of the parents was going to get primary residential parent status in this case. What if it had been Mom that had gotten that? Would Dad have stood up and yelled out the same thing?
No.
I doubt it. I think there's still a presumption in this country that moms are the ones that should have custody of their kids. And when they don't, somehow that means the court's taking the kid away.
Lindley keeping it real.
Should money that you receive as inheritance be considered income for child support purposes? In the state of Tennessee, as in many states, child support is based on the relative income of the parties. Party that makes more money than the other party may end up paying more in child support because of those higher earnings. Well, what about a person who inherits money from perhaps their father, their mother, their aunt, their uncle? Should that money be used to determine income for child support purposes? Well, that case came up before the Tennessee Court of Appeals not too long ago, and the answer is yes. You have to include that as income. It's considered a gift, and gifts are included in income for child support purposes. The question then becomes, how do you allocate it? How do you spread it out over time? And that's a difficult question. But the short answer is you got to include it in income for child support purposes. You know, people really don't change. They really don't. Your husband, your wife, your baby's mama, your baby's daddy is the same person today that they were when you first met them, unless you met them as an infant. But once a person goes through puberty, they pretty much have developed who they're going to be for the rest of their lives. Yeah, you know, they may drink a little bit more. They may start using drugs that they didn't use before, but they always had that propensity. And you may not have seen it, but you're stuck with that now.
Speaking
I can't
facts.
tell you how many cases I have where people tell me, well, he changed or she changed. No, they really didn't. You just didn't see the true them when you first met them, first fell in love with them, first married
Talk
them,
that
first
talk,
had a
Lindley.
child with them, whatever. So keep that in mind. The person that you are looking at across the table when you're getting a divorce is the same person that you met, married, or had a baby with. The parents had agreed on everything: parenting time, division of property, and child support. And the child support they agreed on was that neither one of them would pay child support to the other parent. They both had equal parenting time. The problem was Dad made substantially more than Mom. And even though Mom didn't want child support from Dad, the court disagreed. The court said under the law, Mom has to receive child support.
So the court can
from Dad,
make you
even though they have
pay,
equal time.
even though she
Tennessee
doesn't want it.
doesn't. Well, here's the deal. In Tennessee,
Unbelievable.
which is where this case happened, we have an income shares child support model. That means that the court's going to take into consideration the income of both parents and the parenting time that each parent has. Now, if both parents were making the same amount of money and had equal parenting time, there would be zero child support. But if you change any one of those two factors, then there's going to be child support paid to one parent or the other. And it doesn't matter whether you have equal parenting time. Always keep a calendar. I had another calendar case the other day. That's a case where somebody has kept a calendar of significant events that happen, usually parenting events.
Free game.
In this case, it was the mother of a child who had been keeping up with all of the days that Dad did not exercise parenting time according to the order. Days that he brought the child home early, weekends that he didn't exercise, or that he brought the kids home a day early. Turns out Dad had missed about 30 days of parenting time. He had been awarded 95 days in the parenting agreement that the parties had reached. Child support was based on that. Well, in this case, Mom was able to show the court that Dad was not exercising the 90 or 100 days that they had agreed to. And so the court knocked the number of days down to what he was actually exercising and ended up increasing child support. Folks, keep a calendar. Keep a calendar of all of those events because it'll come in handy if you got to go to court. Boom, just like that, the judge took the kids away from both parents. No time to argue, no time to debate, no time to go back and undo what had been done. Here's what happened. Both parties were so at each other, slinging mud in the courtroom, calling each other names. The judge had had enough. So what she did is she said, you guys don't have any business, either one of you, with these kids right now. Until this divorce is over and we can get these matters settled, I'm going to give the kids to whichever set of grandparents is more fit and wants the kids. And that's what the judge did. Let me tell you something. That case settled in about a week, and it settled in mediation. The judge probably did the right thing. Legally, probably not. If we had appealed it, which would have taken months, we probably would have won that appeal. But the judge knew what she was doing. She was putting the parties in a position where they had no choice but to either settle or lose their kids. Mary's mom became sick and had to have 24-hour care. Mary was the one that ended up giving her that care. Mary was 35. She had a 6-year-old little boy with John. John was the boy's father. When Mary went to put John on child support, Mary argued that, hey, I haven't got any income, I don't have a job, and I can't work because I'm taking care of my mom. Now, normally when a parent who's able to work isn't working, the court will impute income to that person. And that's important because the court looks at the income of both parties in order to determine what child support is going to be. Well, in this case, Mary used a little known and little used provision in the child support guidelines to be excused from working. She's a caregiver for a family member. Therefore, the court excused her from working and did not impute income to her. Now, here's where it doesn't seem fair. John ended up having to pay more in child support because of that. Which doesn't seem fair, does it?
Wow.
Dad had stopped paying child support when the kid was 13 years old.
Horrific.
Kid's now 26 years old. He turned 18 8 years ago. Well, Dad had forgotten about it. He didn't pay. Mom didn't come after him. Dad figured it was a dad issue. Well, all of a sudden, Mom hired an attorney and filed a petition for contempt against Dad for the money that he didn't pay between the time the son was 13 and the time he was 18. And that amounted to about $60,000. So now Dad's looking at paying $60,000 in arrears plus interest, which by that time made it about $120,000. Plus he was facing a contempt petition. You know, the thing is, there's not really a statute of limitations on the collection of past due child support in a lot of states. Some states do have a statute of limitations on that. You got to check your state on that. But the best thing you can do is to pay your child support when it's due and the way you're supposed to pay it. Jennifer had a baby. Problem is, she's married. Usually that wouldn't
Jennifer's
be a
at
problem.
304.
Usually that's what you would want. However, in this situation, the baby is not her husband's. That causes some real issues and some real problems. As a matter of fact, Jenny and her husband have been separated for about 6 years. She's gone on with her life, he's gone on with his life. For whatever reason, they just never took that step.
A lot of plot twists to this story.
Maybe it was religion, maybe it was money, whatever the reason, they never did that. Now she's pregnant by somebody else. But the law considers that child to be her husband's child. The only way to change that is to go through a divorce process, to have DNA tests performed that exclude her husband as being the father of that child. And then you still have to go the extra step of proving that it would be in the best interest of that child to disestablish paternity, legal paternity, in her husband. That's a difficult, time-consuming, and expensive process. That's a lie. She's lying. That never happened. That's what my client did in open court. Stood up right behind me, scared me to death. Yelled that out. His wife had just testified that he had pulled up Friday night to pick up their son, and when she came out to tell him that their son was sick and couldn't go to visitation, he pulled out a gun, pointed it at her, and said, "Give me my damn son." She called the cops, but he left before they got there. That was the behavior of an irrational, angry person. Well, guess what the judge just saw? Behavior of an irrational, angry person. Who do you think she's going to believe? Well, you know the answer to that. You know, if
game.
you just sat still, which is what you got to do in court in situations like that,
Maintain
and let
frame.
me handle the situation, I could have found out whether she was lying. I would have fired off about 10 rapid-fire questions during cross-examination. Then I would have moved on and asked some other benign questions, and then come back later to those first 10 questions. And if there was a conflict in her answers between the two times, then we would know she was probably lying. Guess who just got engaged? My client's husband. That's right. She called me up the other day and she said, guess what I saw on Facebook? I said, what? She said, my husband has just gotten engaged and now has a fiance. And they've got pictures posted all over Facebook. She's flashing a brand new ring that he got her. Folks, that's crazy. If you're married, don't get engaged until the divorce is final.
These dudes
That's
can't wait
nuts.
to have these women
What he
take their
did
money
was
from
he
them.
took marital funds and bought an engagement ring for his fiance while he's still married. Well, guess what?
Clown.
Those marital funds are half his wife's, half my client's. So what's going to end up happening is he's going to have to give back to my client half the money that he spent
This
on that
coffee
ring.
smells like
Don't
shit.
do that, guys. Don't ever get engaged and buy somebody an engagement ring until you're divorced and until that divorce is final. As an attorney, I'm often called upon to give advice in family law situations because that's the type of law that I practice. It's funny, but a lot of times people won't take my advice. They usually end up in trouble when they don't. If you're going to ask an attorney for advice, you should at least take the advice that they give you. Otherwise, you might get in trouble. Perfect example occurred a couple of months ago. I had a mother call me up. She's a mother of a 5-year-old little girl. She was divorced. It was Dad's weekend to have the little girl. Dad called up about 30 minutes ahead of time, said, I'm coming to get our daughter. Mom told the little girl and she started screaming and crying. Mom called me up. What should I do? Well, you should follow the court order. If you don't, you might get in trouble. You might get arrested. You might lose custody of your daughter. You might be in contempt of court. Well, Mom didn't take my advice for whatever reason, and she ended up with a warrant for her arrest. In that situation, she was charged with interfering with Dad's parenting time. You know, if you're going to call an attorney up and ask for advice, you ought to take the advice. So Jennifer had gotten pregnant by Steve, didn't tell Steve, told Bob. So Bob and Jennifer got married, and neither one of them told Steve, but they both knew the truth.
Evil.
And they went ahead and Bob signed the birth certificate. Well, Steve found out. He found out about 3 years later. The child started looking a lot like Steve. Some of Steve's friends and some of Jennifer's friends that they had in common told Steve about it. So he inquired and sure enough found out that that was his biological child.
Steve
So he
was
hired an
busting the
attorney and
cheeks.
filed a petition to disestablish paternity in Bob and to establish paternity in himself. The court heard all the proof and ruled that Bob and Jennifer committed fraud by signing the birth certificate and not letting Steve know that he was the biological father.
Sounds fair.
The court disestablished paternity in Bob and established paternity in Steve. Do you think that was the right result? Do you think the judge could have done something different? What do you think Bob and Jennifer ought to do at this point? What effect, if any, does a divorce have on a step-parent adoption? Here's a common scenario. Mom and Dad get married. Mom already has a child from a previous relationship. Dad ends up adopting that child through a step-parent adoption. That now becomes that person's child, that father's child. Well, what happens if the parties get divorced after that? Well, Dad is either going to owe child support, have visitation, or get custody. And I've seen situations where a step-parent who has adopted their stepchild ends up getting custody of that stepchild through a divorce because mom's either using drugs or is not fit to properly care for the child. If not, if the mother gets custody of the child, then the father in that situation is going to end up paying child support for their adopted stepchild. Because when you adopt a child, that child becomes your child for all purposes, child support, inheritance, etc. Mom wanted to move with the minor child more than 1,000 miles away from Dad. Problem was, Dad played a significant role in the child's life, went to all the ball games, spent tons of time with the kid. Well, Dad would have won that case, except for one problem. Dad screwed up. Here's what happened. Mom sent what we call a relocation letter to Dad, spelling out what she wanted to do and telling Dad he had 30 days to object to the relocation. Dad did object. He sent another letter saying, I object to this. I don't want you to move with my child. That meant that Mom had to file a petition and ask the court to allow her to relocate. The judge was not going to do that, but she filed the petition anyway. Dad had 30 days to respond to that petition by law. Guess what? He failed to do that. And because he failed to respond within 30 days, the court had no choice but to let mom move, relocate with the child.
Terrible.
Remember, if you've got a relocation case, you've got to follow the letter of the law.
Free game.
There's no two ways about it. In this case, Dad didn't, and the kid was allowed to move. A few years ago, I was involved in a divorce case. I was representing the wife. While that divorce was pending, but before the final decree was entered, the husband had a horrible car wreck. He was severely injured. We didn't know if he was going to survive at first. Well, he did survive, and he went out and he hired one of these big law firms that handles personal injury cases. You know who they are. You hear them on TV all day long. Well, we thought to ourselves, is he going to recover a lot of money? Looks like he probably will. He wasn't at fault. Well, we decided that that was probably marital property. And sure enough, in the state we were in, turns out it was marital property. That the proceeds from that personal injury case for an accident that occurred during the marriage, between the time the parties were married and the time the judge banged that gavel and said you're divorced, is marital property. Now, it's different in each state, so you got to check your state's law to see. But in the state we were in, that was marital property. Bob and Jennifer got married about 2 years ago. About a year and a half into the marriage, Jennifer came to Bob and told him that she was no longer happy as a woman, that she wanted to transition to a man. Bob was a little bit upset at first, but he became accepting of the idea. And
Accepting of the idea.
This coffee smells like
Bob and
shit.
her want to stay married. But what does that mean legally? Do they now have a same-sex marriage? Does it even matter? Does the law even care? Those are questions that we grapple with as lawyers. You know, there are a number of questions that have come up in the arena of same-sex marriage that the law just hasn't caught up with yet. And we're still trying to adapt, and we're still trying to decide issues that are tough issues in that area. Over the next week, we're going to talk about some of those issues. We're going to talk about some of the problems that have come up, some of the issues that have come up, and the way the courts are handling those issues, and the things that probably are going to change over the next couple of years. So stay tuned. Mom and Dad were the divorced parents of 2 kids. One of those kids just turned 18 years old and graduated from high school. Dad no longer had an obligation to pay child support for that child. Well, what Dad did is he cut his child support in half. He'd been paying about $700 a month in child support for both kids, so he figured, well, what the heck, I guess I'll pay $350 for one kid. That was a wrong move. In Tennessee, as in a lot of states, we have what's called an income share model. It's based on a somewhat sophisticated mathematical formula. But what we do know is that you can't cut child support in half in these situations because you're not paying 50% of child support for each child. Each child you have, you pay less of a percentage of income for that child than you did for the previous child. In this case, Mom filed a contempt petition against Dad, and Dad was found in contempt. What Dad should have done is petition the court and wait for the court to make.
This is part 3 in my series of divorce stories. This episode is titled Divorced Women versus Family Court. Without any further delay, let's get into it.
Roderick and Roseanne got married right out of high school. She was kind of a go-getter. She went to college, got her 4-year degree. He, on the other hand, didn't amount to a whole lot. He had a few jobs on and off, but he developed a drinking problem, a gambling problem. He was an athlete in high school, but that didn't translate well into adulthood. He gained a bunch of weight. He was pretty much lazy. Well, after she finished college, she left. They split up, but they didn't get divorced. About 15 years later, they'd been married now for almost 20 years, she decided she was going to file for divorce. She was shocked to learn from her lawyer that he was going to be entitled to half of her 401k that she had been saving up. It was now worth in excess of $500,000.
Beautiful.
She was shocked. Folks, remember, there's a clock that starts running when you get married, and that clock doesn't stop running until you get divorced, until the judge bangs that gavel and says you're divorced, and anything you acquire during that time period is going to be marital property subject to division. Do you have an internet business? Many of you do. If you do, listen up. This is a story about Tamara and William. They got married at a young age. She was 19, he was 21. He had a decent job at the time. He was working at a local warehouse. Tamara wasn't working at all when they got married, but soon after they got married, she started an online-based business. Now, her business consisted of her showing different makeup and beauty tips. I don't understand it, but apparently that's a thing. Apparently it can make money. It started out as just a hobby, but soon after that, it started making money. And by the time they filed for divorce, about 7 years later, Her little hobby was making over $200,000 a year, far more than what William was making. Now, at first, William wasn't interested in the little hobby and thought it was ridiculous. That is, until he spoke to his divorce attorney and he realized it's a legitimate business, it's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's marital property, meaning he has an interest in that business even though he didn't start it and doesn't have anything to do with it. The problem is, how do you value such a business? Well, believe it or not, there are actually companies out there that will look at the business and give it a value. They will value internet business. The issue with this business was whether the business had a value apart from Tamara. In other words, if the business was sold and she was no longer involved in the business, would it still make money? Or was she such an integral part of that business that you couldn't separate the business from her? Well, as it turned out, the business had an estimated value after the valuator analyzed it of about $450,000. They finally agreed that William would keep his entire 401k, which at the time was worth about $275,000. She would keep the business, but she would pay William $75,000 as his share of the business at the rate of $2,500 a month for 3 years. Valuating these businesses can be tricky. Those businesses can be somewhat speculative. They depend on the platform that you're on, the reputation that you have, the whims of your viewers. The valuator will look at things like revenue stream, inventory, if you have inventory, debt, intellectual property rights that you might have, operating cost. Then there are additional intangible assets that they're going to look at, such as the time spent building the business, the effort required to maintain the relationships of the customers you have. All those things will be taken into consideration. But if you have a business, an internet business, and you're married and you're contemplating divorce, keep in mind that that business is probably worth some money. Michael was 3 years old when his parents separated. They agreed on a week-on, week-off schedule. Dad would have 1 week, Mom would have 1 week. When Dad would bring Michael home from his parenting time for the start of Mom's parenting time, Mom would find a bruise, a cut, a scrape, a knot on the head, something going on with Michael that would cause her concern. So what did she do? Well, she called the Department of Children's Services and reported that Michael had been abused at his dad's house. Every time, DCS would have to send an investigator over to Dad's house to do a full investigation to determine whether or not there was abuse. And every single time they found no abuse. Every single allegation was unfounded by DCS. Well, this went on for a year and a half, 17 allegations. So Dad took Mom back to court with a petition to modify, based in part upon all of those allegations that Mom was making that were unfounded. Mom admitted to it in court. Dad ended up getting custody of Michael, and Mom had weekend parenting time with an admonition not to make unfounded allegations of abuse against Dad to DCS.
Beautiful.
Mom and Dad were the parents of a 2-year-old little boy, and they went through a divorce. In the divorce, Dad got standard parenting time every other weekend. Well, about a year later, Dad was involved in a horrible wreck. It was his fault. He was drunk. He killed somebody. He was charged with vehicular homicide, and he did about 6 years in jail. When he got out, the kid was about 8 years old, didn't know who he was. He shows up at the front door with the parenting plan in hand, torn and tattered, claiming that he was entitled to parenting time, and he was right. Mom had never gone back to court to ask the judge to modify the parenting plan to suspend Dad's parenting time. Well, this little 8-year-old boy was devastated. He didn't know who this man was that showed up at his door wanting to take him away. He was scared to death. Mom should have gone back to court because there was a change in circumstances. Asked the judge to suspend Dad's parenting time until Dad got out of jail and could come back to court and prove that he could be a good parent. That's the only solution in this situation. Mom was strung out on drugs and couldn't care for her son. He was 6 years old. So what they did is they moved in with her parents, the child's grandparents, and they began to take care of the child. Mom would be gone sometimes 2 or 3 days at a time. They were left to feed, clothe, and shelter that little boy, take him to school, get him home. Mom would come in and threaten to take him if things didn't go her way. So what the grandparents did is they went to court, and they initially got a protective custody order, a temporary order giving them custody of the child. The problem is they had to notify the child's natural father. Well, he had never really been involved in the child's life. The child was 6 years old. He had maybe seen the child 2 or 3 times. But once he was put on notice, he came from a different state where he lived to Tennessee where this case was pending. And he said, hey, that's my child. I want him. Well, the grandparents were horrified. But guess what? They were unable to prove that he posed a substantial risk of harm to the child. So guess who got the kid? The father got the kid.
Beautiful.
Grandparents lost custody, mom lost custody, father has custody. So mom's driving down the road at 85 miles an hour in a 55 mile per hour zone. The problem is the kid's in the car with her. To compound the problem, the kid is not in a child restraint seat, but is sitting in the front seat with the front seat airbag strapped into the seat belt. Kid's 3 years old, should have been in a child restraint seat. Cops pull her over. Cops arrest her for reckless driving and child endangerment for not having the child in a child restraint seat and going 85 miles an hour in a 55 zone. Dad got wind of the fact because DCS was called to the scene. They in turn called Dad. Dad came and got the child. Next day, he hires a lawyer, goes into court, asks the court to give him custody of the child because of mom's behavior. The judge heard all the proof and refused to do that. The judge said, I'm going to give her another chance.
Wow.
Looked at mom with a stern warning. If you ever do it again, Dad's going to get custody. What do you think about the outcome of that case?
Jim was Lieutenant Commander of the United States Navy, and he had patience. He could wait things out. He was deployed overseas at some point, and his wife filed for divorce. He was able to delay those proceedings for about 3 years. He didn't really want a divorce, didn't really care one way or the other, but his wife sure wanted one. She had moved on, found somebody new, wanted to get married to him, start a whole new life. Now, they'd been married for about 15 years, so she was entitled to half his retirement, half his TSP, half of just about everything. He didn't want her to get any of his retirement or his TSP, so he just drug things out. After about 3 years, finally, she gave up. She threw in the towel. She said, you can keep your military retirement, your TSP, I just want a divorce. So she signed the paperwork and the judge granted the divorce. In that case, he had a lot of patience. That cost mom close to $300,000 in lost income from the retirement and the TSP, but it saved dad the same amount.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful story. Yeah, man, a couple of wins here for the guys, right? And I'm not counting score, man. Come on, why would I do that? You know what I kind of gather from these type of stories is when I hear situations where women are getting treated unfairly in family court, I imagine that they gain more sympathy than when men get treated unfairly in family court, right? And I really believe that that's the only way change will come. That's the only way laws will get changed, is more women experiencing the unfair treatment. That's the only way I see change coming. Why? Because we live in a gynocentric society. We live in a society that caters to women and tries to make life as comfortable as possible for them. And men in these types of situations, a lot of the times are kind of like disposable and seen as like, it's okay, he's a man, right? He'll get over it. I don't think bringing awareness to these situations like myself and other people are doing will really bring any true change when it comes to the laws. I think what it does is really cause men to seriously contemplate marriage and see if it's worth it for you. Look at the person you're with, right? And come to that decision by yourself, but you should be informed. I think you should at least be informed, right? You should at least know the dangers and the gravity of the situation when it comes to marriage. But change will probably come from women complaining and getting a taste of what it's like to be on the receiving end of child support, on the receiving end of not having custody of your kids, and on the receiving end of paying alimony till their husband either dies or remarries. Then women will start saying, hey, there's something wrong here and people have to look at this. Things have to change. This is episode 4 of Divorce Stories featuring Lenley Richter. Shout out to Lenley, man. He's providing free game out here for men to put themselves in the best position if they are crazy enough to get married today, and also really making some men's decision to not get married more concrete, right? Check him out. I've got his TikTok pinned to the top comment. Without any further delay, let's get into it.
Something happened this weekend that made me madder than I've been in a long time. I represent the father of a 3-year-old little boy. The father happens to be in the United States Army stationed down in Texas. Well, he and the mom were living down there together until about 6 months ago when they got crossways. Mom moves back to Tennessee, where they're both from, and takes the little boy with him. Well, dad's about to be deployed. He's going to be overseas for at least the next 9 months, probably longer. So he wants to see his son. Hadn't seen him in 6 months since they left Texas. Well, he calls me up. I call the other lawyer up. We work it out to where Dad's going to get up here about 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, pick his son up, have his son until 6 on Sunday. Then he's going to head back and then go overseas. Well, he gets here Saturday afternoon about 3 o'clock, goes to the door, kisses little boy, talks to his little boy, gets him reacclimated to him, then asks Mom, hey, I need to get the car seat. Can I have it, please? She says, no. He said, what are you talking about? She says, get your own damn car seat. That's mine. What are you talking about? He said, I paid for it. It came out of my money. She said, I don't care. Get your own car seat if you want to see our son. He had to go to Walmart, lose about 2 hours of time with his son, buy a car seat, come back, pick his son up, and spend the rest of the time with his son.
Wow.
He was mad. I was mad. I called the other lawyer up and let him have it. What do you think about that? If my client wasn't going to be deployed, I'd probably file something in court Monday morning and try to get him custody of the little boy. What do you think about her behavior?
Terrible.
The 39-year-old father of a 10-year-old little boy developed a brain tumor. It had to be surgically removed. It was serious. There was some residual damage to his motor functions, damage to his speech, things that kept him from being able to be gainfully employed. Well, when he was first diagnosed, his parents were smart enough to know that he was paying child support under a court order, and if they didn't do something quickly to stop that child support from mounting up, it was going to continue to accrue. So they hired an attorney to go into court on his behalf and petition the court to stop the child support. Got a judge to issue a temporary order to stop it until it could be determined what his prognosis was. When they determined that, they were able to go into court and have child support stopped completely. By doing that, they kept all those arrears from mounting up. They kept there from being a contempt petition. They kept him from ending up possibly in jail, even though he was disabled. All of those things because his parents were smart enough to know that they needed to file something immediately. I was sitting in court the other day waiting for my case to be called. The lawyer in front of me, it's a young lawyer, he had a case where the father of a 2-year-old child was trying to get custody of the child. Now, the problem that lawyer had with his client was that his client hadn't spent much time with the child since the child was born. It appeared that the mother and him lived together for maybe a short period of time after the child was born, but then he only saw the child a few times a month, and then the problem he had was he only saw the child during the day, no overnights. In the end, he didn't prevail. He was awarded every first, third, and fifth weekends of each month and alternating holidays. That's what we used to call standard visitation. You know, the courts in Tennessee, as in most states, are supposed to be gender neutral in determining custody of a child. The problem is in an initial custody determination, the father's going to be usually at a distinct disadvantage. The statute in Tennessee looks at 15 factors that the court has to weigh before deciding which parent is going to get custody. And one of those factors is which parent has performed most of the parenting responsibility. That's almost always going to be the mother in a situation like that. The other factors include things such as which parent has primarily provided the child with food, clothing, medical care, education, and other necessary care. And that's almost always going to be the mother of a young child. Other factors include the emotional ties that exist. Again, the mother will prevail on that. And probably the most important is who's been the primary caregiver of the child since birth. Again, that's almost always going to be the mother of a young child. That puts dads in that situation at a real disadvantage. Doesn't seem fair, does it? What do you think the solution is in that case? Dad was paying about $650 a month in child support for one minor child. The problem is that he and Mom lived in two different states. Mom lived in Tennessee, he lived in Florida. So the way they worked out the visitation and the parenting time was that the child would go down to Florida and be with Dad the bulk of the summer, about 2.5 months. Well, one summer the child went down there to be with Dad, and Dad decided on his own that he didn't need to pay child support when he had the child during the summer. Why should he have to pay Mom $650 when he had the child and he was having to feed, clothe, and shelter the child? That wasn't a good idea. Mom took him back to court for contempt. He was found in contempt. He had to pay that child support back. Fortunately, the judge didn't lock him up for contempt because he really didn't have the intent to violate the order. He just misunderstood. Well, here's the deal. Child support is set really on a yearly basis, and you pay that out every month. And it doesn't matter how many days in that particular month you have the child, you still got to pay that set amount every month. In this case, it was $650 per month. A couple came in to see me not too long ago, and they wanted to get divorced. They had everything worked out. They had written it all down. It was beautiful. They had divided up the property between themselves. They had divided up the parenting time, and they were going to get equal parenting time. Dad would have 1 week, Mom would have 1 week. Well, here was the problem. They put 0 on the paperwork for child support. They had both agreed that neither one of them should pay child support to the other because, after all, they've got equal parenting days. Why should child support even be considered? Well, here's the problem. In Tennessee, as in most states, child support is not only based on the number of parenting days each parent has, but also the relative income. In this case, Dad was making almost twice what Mom was making. And in accordance with the guidelines, he should be paying Mom about $700 a month in child support. Kind of doesn't seem fair if they've got equal parenting time, but I explained to him the judge is not going to approve your parenting plan without child support in accordance with the guidelines.
Well, he got home about 8 o'clock in the morning and she was gone with the kids. They'd been married about 5 years, had 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. He figured she had gone to her mom's, who lived about 30 or 40 miles away, but he started texting her. Now, he knew they had been in an argument the night before and that she was upset, but he didn't think she would leave with the kids. So as he texted her all day long, she didn't respond. He sent over 200 text messages that day. Finally, she responded. She said, "Please stop texting me. We're fine." Well, he didn't stop. He kept texting her. "When are you coming home? When can I see my kids? Does this mean we're over?" Text after text after text. Finally, she texted again. "Stop texting me. This is harassment." And it was harassment. She could have him arrested and charged with harassment because she told him to stop and he didn't.
Wow.
He continued to text her. He could be the subject of an order of protection for harassment. That would affect his ability to see his kids. You know, guys, you got to be careful in these situations. Girls, too. If somebody tells you not to text them or call them, don't. Because if you keep on doing it, it could be harassment and you could be arrested. When the son was 16 and the daughter 15, they both came to live with Dad. Dad had been paying child support to Mom, but Mom was having some issues of her own and couldn't really deal with the kids, so she let Dad take them. They agreed among themselves that he didn't have to pay her child support as long as he had custody of them and took care of them. Well, the problem is there was no court order stopping child support. Well, Dad went on and raised the kids, didn't pay child support, even sent them to college, paid for their college tuition, as a matter of fact. They both graduated, did really well, have good jobs now. Well, move forward 9 years. The state takes Dad to court and says, "Hey, you owe child support for that time period you didn't pay when the kids were 15 to 18 years old. You got to pay it back. Not only that, but you got to pay the interest back as well." Dad argued, "Hey, wait a second, I raised these kids during that time period." Court said, "Too bad. You never went back and changed that order." What do you think about that? Do you think the state should allow Dad to go back and change the order and modify it retroactively? Or do you think Dad should be on the hook for the child support that he didn't pay, even while he had custody of the kids? Husband took $100,000 out of his 401k that he'd been saving for retirement and invested it in his wife's business. They were both hoping that that business would be successful and could generate enough money for them to retire. It didn't. It wasn't successful. It went belly up. He lost every bit of that $100,000. Well, the parties got divorced about 2 years later. He argued before the judge that he should get that $100,000 back. After all, that was his retirement account. And he invested in his wife's business, being good-natured, and the business failed. Now he wants that money back. The judge said, "No, you're not getting that money back. That was a marital transaction. It occurred during the marriage. You invested that money knowing the risk. If the business had been successful and was worth $2 million now, you'd be wanting $1 million of it, and I would give you $1 million of it. You took the risk. You're going to have to suffer the loss." What do you think about that? Do you think the judge was right in that regard, or do you think he should have given the husband his money back? I was sitting in court not too long ago, and I was listening to 2 older lawyers, well-established lawyers, arguing a custody case before the judge. One of the lawyers stood up and said, "You know, Your Honor, my client has allowed the father to see her child at least every other weekend since they've been separated, and even more." The other lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, that's not true. She has not allowed him to see her child, but maybe once a month, if that much." Finally, the judge said, "Guys, who are we talking about? Whose child is this? Is this a child of the marriage, or is this her child?" Well, both lawyers said, "Well, it's a child of the marriage, Your Honor."
To which the judge replied, then why are we referring to the child as her child and her giving him something? That's not the way this works. You know, there's a mindset that permeates the judicial system in child custody and visitation cases that somehow the mother is in charge of the parenting time and she gives the parenting time for father to him. That's not true. The judge kind of set him straight in that regard. But you know, that is a real problem in the judicial system, is that mindset that somehow the mother gets to dictate when the father sees the child. Rarely does a month go by that I don't get a call from somebody who has tried to do their own divorce and has messed something up and now needs a lawyer to go in and fix it. You know, I'm all for people doing their own divorce, especially if it's simple and there are no kids involved, there's no real property, and there are no retirement accounts. But if any of those three things exist, then I always suggest a person at least get a lawyer to look over the paperwork to make sure everything's done correctly. You know, you can mess up a deed and it can screw up your mortgage, screw up being able to sell that house later. You can mess up the division of a retirement account, and it might cost you tens of thousands of dollars in taxes and penalties if you haven't done it right. And of course, if you mess up a parenting plan, it can really screw your kids up. And it's hard to fix those things once they've been messed up. So if you've got any of those three things, it's probably best to consult a lawyer. But if not, feel free to do the divorce yourself. You know, most states, they have forms online that you can use to do your own divorce. There's something in the law called a presumption. A presumption simply means the law will take something as true, whether it's true or not. A good example of that would be if you're married and you have a child, then that child is assumed to be a child of the marriage. In other words, your husband is assumed to be the father of that child. It creates a presumption. We know that's not always the case. Sometimes he's not. And you can overcome that presumption by presenting DNA proof that he's not. Well, John found out the hard way about presumptions. He had married this girl, his high school sweetheart, after his first wife had died. About a year into that marriage, he deeded his house that he had owned for about 10 years to his new wife, deeded it to her and to him as a married couple. Well, about a year later, she filed for divorce. One of the issues in the divorce was whether or not that was marital property. Well, since he had deeded it to her, it created a presumption that it was marital property. And he could not overcome that presumption, and he ended up losing half the value of that house to her in the divorce. What do you think about that? Do you think presumptions in the law are a good thing, or do you think we ought to have to prove everything? Dad was paying child support of about $500 a month for two kids from two different mothers. One of the mothers was getting about $200 a month, the other $100 a month. The reason why? One mother was making more than the other. The mother that was making less money got more child support. The one that was making more money got less child support. Well, Dad's hours had gotten reduced at his job, and so he was making less money. So he decided that he should be paying less child support. He petitioned the court on his own without a lawyer to reduce his child support for both children. Well, he got to court, and as it turned out, the mothers were also making less money. And as it turned out, he ended up having to pay almost $100 more in child support than he was before. You know, they say in the South, you shouldn't go stirring up a hornet's nest because you might get stung. In this case, he did. He got stung because he didn't take into consideration that they might be earning less money too. What do you think about that? Mom and Dad were the unmarried parents of a 6-year-old little boy. Mom was from North Carolina. She wanted to go back there from Tennessee, where she currently lived. She had family in North Carolina. She had looked for a job and found one. She had found an apartment. She had talked to the dad about it. He seemed to be okay with it, so she started the process. She rented the apartment, she closed on the job, and she told family, hey, we're coming. Everybody was excited. Then all of a sudden, right before it was time for her to leave, Dad served her with papers. And in those papers was an order from the court saying you can't move. The judge set a hearing 30 days out, but gosh, she had already signed for the apartment. She had been planning on moving that weekend. Here was the problem. Mom didn't follow the law. The law in Tennessee provides that if you want to relocate with a child and you have primary residential parent status, you've got to send a certified letter to the other parent letting them know that you want to move, where you want to move, why you want to move. And the important thing is that if they don't respond within 30 days objecting to the move, that you will be allowed to move. She hadn't done that. Well, the case went to trial, and the judge went ahead after trial and said you can move. It's in the best interest of the minor child. It worked out good in that situation. You know, every state's a little bit different. Every state has a law regarding the relocation of a child and what steps you've got to follow if you want to relocate. Relocation cases are tough. You're taking the child away from one of the parents who probably has been spending a lot of time with that child. In this case, it was going to work out okay, but it doesn't always work out that well. Dad was sent to jail until he paid a purge payment of $1,000. He found himself $3,000 behind in child support, and here was his excuse. It seems that about 6 months ago, when the final decree was entered and the parties were divorced, he had agreed to pay child support through the state. In this case, it was the state of Tennessee. Every state has a system where you can pay through the state. This happened to be Tennessee. What they would normally do is you would fill out certain paperwork telling them where you worked, who your employer was, and who the money was supposed to go to once they got it. And then the state would take that information, would send a wage assignment to your employer would deduct the money, send it into the state, and the state would disperse it to the other parent. But he never did that. And he knew he didn't do that. He knew the money wasn't coming out of his check. He knew he wasn't paying child support, but he didn't do anything about it. Folks, you got to be proactive in these situations. If you're supposed to pay child support through the state, you've got to take certain steps to make sure the state has the proper information. In this case, he hadn't done that, and he was sentenced to jail until he made a $1,000 purge payment.
Jesus.
And then he had to go ahead and fill out that paperwork. What do you think about that? You think that was a fair result?
I had a woman comment on one of these videos, divorce attorney videos, and she basically was like, man, I wonder what happens to women in divorce. I'm like, what? I was reading, I was like, what are you saying? And I guess what she meant is, do women get screwed over the same way that men get in divorce? And the answer to that question is no, they don't. Right? I've tried to find videos because I think they would perform pretty well. Number one, you guys would enjoy them. I've tried to find videos of women getting the short end of the stick in family court, and it's hard to find videos of those stories. I think Lenley has a few of them, and I put together something on that. It was like 10 minutes, right? A lot shorter, but I've got like over 5 videos currently, a few hours of content of just like divorce advice for men in specific, and also all these horrific stories of men going through terrible, terrible divorces. That's the reality, right? And so what happens to women typically in divorce is the opposite of what you're hearing happens to men. That's the answer to that question. Listen, I hope you guys got something out of part 4 of divorce stories. So a lot of you probably watched that video and you thought to yourself, okay, I got it. Don't get married, right? That's where you're at. And I don't blame you. I don't blame any men today who don't see value in marriage, because honestly, if you look at the logic in 70% of women initiating divorce, right, men getting the bad end of the stick the majority of the times when it comes to marriage, the logical thing to do would be to not get married, right? So there's that first set of guys who are just not going to do it, and understandably so. And for guys like me, I've said in multiple videos that I will probably get married. Right. I don't know if it's maybe because I grew up in a 2-parent family home. But for guys like me, you know, I think it's important to, first of all, educate yourself. And second of all, understand that you have to take some type of provision to protect yourself if you still plan on getting married. Now, that could be anything, right? Like, I'm from Africa, man. So I have no problem going under a tree and hiring some pastor to bless us and call it a marriage, because at the end of the day, I don't believe a piece of paper determines whether I'm married or not, right? Or you might want to go the route of getting an ironclad prenup. We see that helps and has helped a lot of successful people who are protecting assets, etc. Nevertheless, what you can't deny is it's never been more dangerous for a man to decide to get married than today, right? So you're not crazy if you're a man who decides not to get married. You're crazy if you're a guy who decides to take that step. Now, you're especially crazy, not crazy, you're stupid if you're a guy who decides to take that step and not protect yourself, right? In some shape or form. Now, are you guaranteed that you're foolproof? I don't think anything in life is guaranteed.
right? And this video wasn't made to shift you in any which way. This video was made to educate and maybe strengthen your decisions and your beliefs, no matter what that may be. But you're a man at the end of the day. Don't let anybody influence you into making a decision when it comes to this, especially a woman that you love, right? Don't let love, blindly loving any woman, put you in the circumstance where now you're getting divorced because you chose to make a decision because you were pressured. She gave you an ultimatum. Don't let family members, don't let people around you pressure you into a situation that you're not ready for. That's the first thing, right? Make a decision that's based in your own choice, right? You decided to do this. And also protect yourself, man. Protect yourself. Overall, the last thing I would encourage you is to remember that female nature never fails, right? You are loved conditionally. Yes, I'm going to take it there. Stop buying into this idea that a woman is just going to love you no matter what. Be prepared and understand that this is the reality of marriage, and learn game, right? Learn the RP, expound on your knowledge, watch more content, and then apply it. Think differently. You can't go into today's dating world, marriages, with old set of rules and ways of thinking, because things have changed, man. These women today are off the chain. Most of these women belong to the earth. They belong to everybody. Because that's the whole problem, is that you have all these rules and court systems that are still operating with old day principles in a modern day. They have not changed, right? There's no reason any man today should be paying alimony to a woman who can work for the rest of her life. Anyways, guys, that's my piece. I'm curious to know what you guys think of the content. Comment down below. As always, I appreciate you for checking out this episode of The Coffee Pod. Don't forget to hit that like and don't forget to subscribe. Till next time, man, I'm out. Peace.